Hello and welcome to Sidequest. This is our weekly video game show here at Geekverse. I'm your host, Dylan Muss, and I with me a very special guest here on the show today, making her podcast debut on Geekverse, Glimmering Harpy, Raya. Welcome to Sidequest. How are you doing today?
Hi, Dylan. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, I'm excited to chat with you for the first time about like my interest in video games and stuff. So yeah, I'm just stoked to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun discussion, fun episode. You know, me and you met briefly on like the Geekverse 24-hour stream where every year we have a trivia battle, and you partook in that, and that's where I heard about you and the content that you do, your YouTube channel, talking about video games and other things that you're passionate about. And then we kind of connected after that, and it's been a bit, but we finally have nailed down today here to just talk about some video games. So yeah, I kind of want this episode to just be me and the audience like getting to know you and the games and the nerdy things that you're into and all that. And so I don't know, I think it should be a fun laid back episode, which is good because next week me and Kirkland are going to do like our game of the year stuff, and that's probably going to be very long and extended, and we're probably going to be very exhausted by the end of that. So I think this is a good like calm before the storm, just like a nice chill holiday sort of episode, if that makes sense.
No, that's a good idea. Well, yeah, I'm stoked.
Yeah. Uh, when I was going through, looking through your YouTube channel and listening to some stuff, you kind of do all sorts of different stuff. But how would you describe the content? Like, do you want to just shout out and plug your content here at the top here?
Sure. So my username across pretty much all my socials and my primary YouTube channel is at Glimmering Harpy, and the basis of my main channel has is definitely game focused. So I talk about like gaming devices that I'm a big fan of, fighting games, RPGs, action adventure games, indie games, RPGs, JRPGs. Some podcasts in the past as well with different guest appearances from different channel creators as well. And yeah, that's been pretty much the mainstay of that channel for going on maybe like 2-3 years. I take extended breaks here and there just for life, but
Yeah,
but yeah,
fair.
like pretty much keep all my legacy content there, so it's pretty accessible for everyone to see, and it's pretty much the nature of the beast, I guess, if you want to know like a little bit more about like how I structure content and how I present it. A lot of it is like very like I try to put my own like signature branding and spin on it, and especially with like presentation and
hmm
how I have a bunch of different voices on to talk about similar topics. So that's something that's I'm really passionate about. That I hope is like kind of the landmark of my brand
Nice.
so far. Just making a space that is quintessentially me, but also inclusive of other folks as well, and welcoming to other folks. And that's pretty much my mo. And I also love movie talk, TV talk, pop culture talk, music. Yeah, there's a huge interest of for that may not always have like the right fit over on my gaming channel. So I made a second channel called the Glimmercast, where the intention was to pretty much host everything that was like non-gaming over there,
Mm,
as well as
gotcha.
potentially some podcasts too. So that channel, I've been slowly racking up content as far as like shorts and edited video content, which I've gotten more into over the last like year or two. Editing is something that I really find a lot of fulfillment in, because it's where I can be more intentional with how I present my content and telling a story through editing. So that's actually pretty cathartic for me.
Nice.
Rather than trying to, wax poetic about something on a podcast. But yeah, that is pretty much what I do online for the most part. I love supporting my friends and other creators to do what they love, and especially when like they talk about things that I'm also interested in. So yeah, that's about it.
That's amazing. Yeah, one thing I really like about your YouTube channel is that like you got live streams of like playing through games, you got like unboxing videos, you got podcasts, you got like reviews and things. So you kind of have like no matter what someone's looking for, whether they just want something short and like quick or like a longer thing to just kind of have on, like you kind of have it, you kind of run the gamut there, running all sorts of different content. So I think that's great.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Let's get into it here. So let's just talk about some of the games that we've been playing. One thing, maybe you have some other surprises for him, but you mentioned that you've been playing some Pokemon ROM hacks, and I'm very curious to hear about that because like Pokemon is not usually like a top series, I guess, for here at Geek First. Like we talk about games every once in a while. Me and Kirkland recently were playing Pokemon Emerald, so we were talking about that a little bit. I loved new Pokemon Snap for no particular reason. I just got like really into that game. But like with the main series, I kind of come back to it every few years and ingest it that way. But I feel like I've never really delved into the world of ROM hacks. But from what I've heard, it sounds like maybe the greatest place to go because like Game Freak, kind of slow to iterate on the games they make. They don't always add a ton of features. It's usually pretty safe games, but I feel like the ROM hack scene is where you get like more interesting stuff. So I don't know, what are some of the highlights of stuff you've been playing there?
Yeah, so I've been playing a lot of ROM hacks of the base game for Pokemon Emerald. So that seems to be
Oh, cool, good
like a
timing for
really
that.
yeah, a really popular sort of like I guess like foundational ROM for or disk image for folks to kind of build off of and take assets and then create either an original story or like a more challenging version of like the core
Right.
story. And I've gotten a lot of great, kind of FaceTime with doing a lot more challenging versions of whether it be like Emerald, Fire Red, or Leaf Green. So those are all like, the Game Boy Advance versions of the mainline Pokemon games. And for me, that was kind of like the renaissance of my memories with the Pokemon series. I first got into it like a lot of folks with like Red, Blue, um, Yellow, Crystal, Gold, Silver. So those are all amazing, and those were like just very like introductory RPG um fun experiences for me where like I got to do my like hours and hours of grinding, searching for Pokemon, just hundreds and hundreds of hours. And then as like quality of life improvements came with um Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, so on, I felt that something about the Game Boy Advance versions just seemed to be very streamlined where especially like on a graphic presentation level,
Yeah,
it kept
definitely.
that charm of what I got with the Game Boy and Game Boy Color versions of the games with like, some added, like shadows and depth and character animations for Pokemon on screen as well. Also, like some environment elements introduced into the battle as well. So things like that. It wasn't like over the top like 3D rendering or like orchestral music or focus on realism or anything like that that came with like the 3DS and Switch games onward, but it was something that just sort of lingered with me as far as like this is like this is like peak Pokemon right here, and I kind of grabbed onto that for the longest time even as an adult. So when I started to go back online and learn more about like emulators and other like fan communities for um, different types of games that are either getting like either fan translations or like revisions by fans. Just sort of like this community who brings it upon themselves to keep the name of an IP alive. There was this other like sub community of Pokemon fans who designed their own games based around existing games, and I thought that was really interesting. So I started watching more YouTube videos of folks doing playthroughs of
Mm.
these ROM hacks, or like these edited versions of these Pokemon games, and then it got to where it was like just challenging versions of those existing games to where it was fully original stories and even some new Pokemon designs too. Like some folks get
Oh.
very ambitious with like
How do
their
those work for you? Are you a fan of what people create, or are you more like, nah, let's keep it to like the canon Pokemon?
yeah, it's a little odd seeing so many different like um different variations of existing Pokemon, especially when there's so many already existing right now where I think we're close to like 1,000. So I can't honestly say I recognize all of them. So like it could
Right.
be like a real Pokemon, but I'm like, wait, what is that? Is that a real Pokemon? And then I Google it and I'm like, oh man, that actually is like canonically a licensed Pokemon. So there is like a good like way for me to kind of get back into Pokemon on a casual level where I can like play it on any device, like on an emulator on my phone is probably like, the most convenient for me to just pull out and like, start playing something and do a save state and then go back to my day. Or for me to just, play a more recent version of a Pokemon ROM hack that has additional what is it, generations of
Okay.
outside of just, one, two, and three. It goes all the way up to like generation nine, I think, at this point. And a lot of folks make custom artwork that would fit in the aesthetic of
That's
the
great. Yeah,
Pokemon
I love
Emerald
that.
design. So there's like a lot of love and passion, and like, just a lot of creativity in the ROM community, where like I even joined like a bunch of Facebook groups and to get the like, ear on the ground for any like new ROMs or any
Mm.
like new updates to existing ROMs that I play. So yeah, I think that is something that I I never really hear a whole lot of talk about, because I always hear about folks talking about like, what's the newest latest game and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, and like there's not much, tread not or we don't really like tread back to like, communities that are keeping certain IPs alive, or just like, or just like our fond memories of playing old games. But like, what
Mm-hmm.
happened to those games afterwards? Are people still talking about them? Like, what's the latest status of any new additional content on them? So I'm kind of in that weird niche where I'm just like, wait, let's, see what's going on like in the community for this particular IP, and what are they doing now?
Yeah, I think that for Pokemon that's so interesting just because it's a series that has never had a drought since it came out, right? Like there's constantly, whether it's the new generations, which for a mainline game like comes out pretty often, but then also like multiple spin-off games coming out every single year. So I feel like for a lot of people like there's like one, they're just getting so many new games that they don't really feel the need to go like find things outside of that. And then if they do want like an old experience, they're probably like very nostalgic for like Emerald or like some of these other ones you're talking about, and they're like maybe just want to go revisit that, but don't really think to go and like tackle it from like a different version from like the ROM hack side of things. But I love what you said about like the Game Boy Advance is one of my favorite consoles, and part of that is like nostalgia, but I also think it's a really interesting pocket for Nintendo where even though it was a handheld, it was like the last time that like first party Nintendo studios were like making pixel art games, really, right? It was like the peak of them making those types of games, and then they like fully moved on to 3D because at that point we were in like the GameCube generation, and then uh I guess the DS afterwards. And so I feel like especially yeah, when you come to like Game Freak, like I guess I'm thinking of like all the DS games. I imagine all those were 3D, like more 3D graphics instead of pixel art, and then maybe they had like little sprites here or there or something. But yeah, to have like the fully pixel art games, like I don't know, Game Freak's art has always been fantastic, like the color palettes, and yeah, I just love the Game Boy Advance in terms of like the screen resolution, the colors. Like it had like the perfect amount of limitations for me to make just like all these really special games. So just some of my all-time favorites are there as well. And yeah, like until recently, I had never even really played any of the Pokemon games on that system. It's just since I'm not a diehard fan, I just play every once in a while. But yeah, picking up a cartridge for Emerald and like playing through that, it's really just fun to go back and experience those kind of things. So yeah, what is like the current ROM hack that you're playing? Which version or what is it? Which game is it a hack of? I suppose.
Okay, yeah, let me check really quick. So, I don't know if folks have been in the know about how iOS now has legitimately like allowed emulators on their app store, so you don't have
Oh,
to hack
cool.
your iPhone or uh, anything like that to try and play emulators on it. You could just play them natively and just get the ROMs wherever you get them. So anyway, the ROM hacks I were playing that I've been playing have been one is called Radical Red, and one is called Pokemon Unbound. So
Oh, I've heard about
yeah,
Unbound. I've heard really good things about Unbound. That's cool.
yeah, it's one of the older ones. So I started playing that one because it's a completely new just world, protagonist, new starters, all like uh in canonical Pokemon, like, or I like legitimate Pokemon.
Yeah.
And what I like about it though is because it's like a completely new like map, gyms, and antagonist team, but still with like the same like core Pokemon, especially like with additional newer generations. I think between like up until like maybe generation 9, I could be wrong, or maybe like 8, maybe 8 or so, because this one is the Pokemon Unbound as a ROM hack is a little bit older. So
Hmm.
um so yeah, I know it has like a lot of the different like newer Pokemon in it, so that's really cool. And then the quality of life enhancements that I was mentioning earlier about like how Game Boy Advance is definitely like kind of like the peak for my Pokemon experience, but going back to those games without like, let's say being able to speed up the frame rate and being able to like grind a
Sure.
little bit faster. Like I'm so used to being able to speed up the frame rate like by 5x and then just grind like, grind up my new Pokemon to be the same level as my other ones so I can continue the game or something like that. It just made grinding a lot less tedious. So going back to just, playing the base cartridge in a Game Boy Advance, as charming as that is, like I'm kind of used to those, benefits of being able to play on like an emulator. So that's what I kind of get with the ROM hacks, is that same like emotional satisfaction of seeing a game presented in a way that is endearing and familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
And also like a lot of the more modern, I guess, like accessibility features for being able to navigate your menu and your item bag a lot more seamlessly, being able to see weaknesses and benefits of different moves
Mm.
like on the same
That's really
screen.
nice.
Yeah.
Since I'm not so much of a diehard fan, I forget all that stuff. Like, what is fairy weak to? I have no idea. Like, and then I feel like
Yes.
I'm playing half the game with like a Wikipedia page open on my phone. It's like it's very nice to have that stuff kind of contextualized within the game. That's perfect.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, case in point, those are things that I are kind of like a learning curve for me too. So yeah, the different like type advantages too, especially because now different Pokemon have different types registered to them as well. Like at one time a Pokemon would be a normal type, and now it's a fairy type, and now a
Oh,
fighting
okay,
type.
yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, you're just messing up my legacy knowledge, and like nothing else matters. Like what I thought was the truth, like back in like 2004, it means nothing now.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I feel like I don't know, for someone like me who's like kind of a passing fan, would you recommend these, or would you more recommend, hey, just play the original games, then if you love those, like then go to the ROM hacks for kind of more of a alternate version of the game? Like I don't know, like even like the first generation, I haven't actually played those games. Do you think like a ROM hack version would be a good way to do it because of that accessibility features, or is it kind of good to go for like the pure original version?
I actually think that anyone who has never played a Pokemon game yet, definitely go for Fire Red or Leaf Green. So those are the Game Boy Advance versions of the games, and
Right.
um, I would I would say start with those versions first. But because I know for myself, I'm someone who has gotten used to being able to speed through grinding a lot. If you'd like to play it on an emulator, I think you'll have a more satisfying time to be able to customize the button layouts and menu options and frame rate of the game, so you can actually like make your experience a little bit more easy to get into, and you don't have to kind of like shoehorn a game style that's not familiar to you um, into your into how you are able to like play the game. Like no, you can make it your own experience instead of having to adapt around it. So
Nice. Sounds good. Uh, what else you been playing lately? Any other highlights from recent games?
yeah, so on my Nintendo Switch, that is my primary gaming device. I was also playing
Nice.
Monster Hunter Stories. So growing up, I was not super familiar with the Monster Hunter mainline series until maybe like um, I want to say maybe like the PSP had one Monster Hunter game on it,
Hmm.
but I didn't own it. But entering into like the Wii U and PS4 onward, and into like Nintendo Switch when more games started to get ported over. Oh, and the 3DS Monster Hunter 3. So yeah, there was like
Nice.
very little exposure to the series I had earlier on, until like maybe around like the late 2010s into like the early 2020s. So yeah, like around what is it, like maybe like 2020 2021, I started to give some of the Monster Hunter Stories games a chance on my 3DS, and then on Switch. So the original Monster Hunter Stories is kind of like a spin-off of Monster Hunter, where it's like a little bit more geared around turn-based action combat, with some elements of like Pokemon, where you would basically train your monsters
Oh,
or go
okay.
out and capture monsters, befriend them. They help you with with different quests that you're on and help you around different obstacles around the map and stuff. So while you're doing quests, a lot of side quests. I'm really big into side quests, so I spend a
Nice.
lot of time on that game on 3DS and then the sequel on Switch. So that's one that I would also. That's another series that I also really like as well because the turn-based combat aspect of it definitely something that's common in Pokemon and kind of uh, a gaming trope that I've always really loved because I'm really big into like tactical strategy types of games too, especially if there's like a grid map system and I can move my team around. So like
Yes, very good.
different types of
Is that
combat
what
like that.
is that what Stories is like? Is there like a grid? Are you positioning people as well, or is it more just like Pokemon style, where you just have like your teams up against each other?
Yeah, it's more Pokemon style where it's like
Okay.
your teams are against each other, but I'm also really big into other turn-based styles of games like the strategy tactical games like Fire Emblem and Disgaea and let me see. Yeah, those are some of like the bigger ones for
Nice.
sure. Tactics Ogre. Oh,
Oh,
Fire
cool. Yeah.
Final Fantasy Tactics. Yeah.
Yes. Cool. Yeah. That's another one of my favorite genres. What's your favorite Fire Emblem game?
Ooh, let me see. Um Awakening was probably the
Yeah.
one on the 3DS that was probably like the biggest one that got a lot of like newbies like me into the series. So that one it was really challenging going into it like it was my first time actually like trying to play a game on normal and still getting like nerfed or not even nerfed but just like getting just obliterated
Yeah.
by the NPC like the computer antagonist teams or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So I was like, uh, I mean, do I want to play on easy? I don't know. Like so that was like one of my sort of like first encounters of like the difficulty scaling and then feeling like kind of self-conscious around like, oh, do I adjust it to easy or do I just struggle through it on normal? But yeah, that was a game that was very rich in different um story paths as well for how you want to like navigate and develop different bonds with your teammates and how you want to like design your team as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and like the kids mechanic was so fun. Like depending on who you pair up, they like have
Mhm,
different children with like different stats and like different hair colors and goofy stuff like that.
mhm.
Makes it very replayable more so than like in a different way than other Fire Emblem games. Yeah, Awakening is fantastic. That it's a I because I've played since like the Game Boy Advance era for Fire Emblem, and then I had like a couple games, like mostly the one on the DS, which was like a remake of an earlier one. I was like, oh man, I really don't like this. Like, am I out on this series? I don't know. And then picked up Awakening and was just like totally in love with it again. And yeah, it had so many new mechanics, but it was also just kind of classic Fire Emblem at the same time. So that's great. Have you gone back and checked out those Game Boy Advance ones since you're a fan of that console as well?
No, I haven't. So like I love that Nintendo online service offers this expanding library
Mm-hmm.
of older console content including the Game Boy Advance, but I honestly haven't spent too much time on it. I think it's because yeah, I don't have the quality of life
Yeah,
enhancements that I do on like an emulator, let's say. So
that's
like
fair. Yeah.
as much like as I love these like older like PS1 and Super Nintendo games and the aesthetic just fits what I like about what I what I look for. It is very hard to go back to like how slow combat and animation and cutscenes are and things like that,
Yeah.
not being able to like skip them or anything. So yeah, those things like that. I it's kind of like a give and take. I'm like, I want to play this game, but then I can't on the official version of the game that I have access to on my Switch. Like I can't skip or make my gameplay any faster, but I can do it on my emulator, so I'll do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's definitely worth noting, especially for Fire Emblem, like because they have one of the Game Boy Advance ones on there. I don't think they have both, or there's a third one that's like only in Japanese that I haven't played, but I think it's Binding Blade, Blazing Blade. I always forget which one it is. And like that game was the first one that what came to like North America as the first like localized in English one, and so it's like very tutorially for like hours and hours and like forcing you to do certain moves. And for me, like playing after a bunch of other ones, going back to it, like I was tearing my hair out at how slow it was. And so that's when I would definitely wish I could like fast forward through some of that stuff. And then also like with Three Houses and then with Engage, where they have like the rewind feature now. So if you lose a unit, you can just go back a few turns. And you can't do it unlimited amounts, right? But that is like the perfect quality of life feature that when I go back to any old Fire Emblem game, I'm like, man, I wish I had that, because I hate losing one guy to a random critical hit and then having to like restart the level when it's taking me like 2 hours to get to this point. That's where I feel like most people, if they ever quit a Fire Emblem game, it's because they had that exact same situation happen where they were deep into a level, lost a character, don't want to restart it because that's just like a frustrating thing to do. And so yeah, I'm sure a lot of the emulators have that too. I guess Nintendo Switch Online, you can at least like make save states, right, more
I was about to say
frequently.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
like especially with the turn-based combat and the tactical combat that you're talking about. Yeah, losing like a major like player in your team and wanting to like go back or rewind a little bit to go back to that. That is like kind of like the best feature that I have too. Oh, and then like creating save states, like especially if I'm going up against like a major like like boss or mid boss character. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's great. Have you played? Just throwing this out. Have you played UFO 50 yet? Like the indie game that came out earlier this year.
no, I didn't. What's that?
Okay, you definitely, because you're into like retro stuff. You're into indie games. Definitely recommend it. UFO 50 is a collection of, it's a bundle of 50 games in one, but they're all like new games. It's not like a collection of old games made by a bunch of indie devs that some are some of my favorites. And it's just 50 games in one, so you kind of get like things from all sorts of different genres. Like there's a couple strategy tactics games in there. There's a bunch of platformers. There's like a racing game sort of thing, puzzle platformers, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely check out UFO 50. I don't know. I've talked about it so much on Sidequest. I don't know if I'll talk about it much today, but like I'm still just playing that, even though I have like 80 hours now, months later, and I still have so much to do because obviously 50 games is a lot to play through in one game. Some of them are pretty short, like you can beat them in like an hour, but then others are like there's a straight up JRPG. Well, I guess it's not JRPG because it's not made by Japanese people, but an RPG rather. That's yeah, like hours long. So it's just one of the 50 games. So definitely add that to your wish list. Or right, it's only on Steam right now, I guess. I don't. Do you play any PC stuff or just on Switch right now for you?
Right now, just on Switch
Yeah,
or yeah, any
I'm sure that
other
game will get
emulator. Yeah.
ported over there pretty soon, maybe for the Switch 2 or something like that. So yeah, definitely pick it up when it goes there. I had one game I wanted to shout out here. This is what I've just been playing the last few days. It's a game called Still Wakes the Deep. Have you heard of this one? It came out earlier this year.
No, I
Uh,
haven't.
yeah, so it came out, I don't know, I think in like the summer, and I just didn't get around to it until recently. This is made by Chinese Room, who are the developer of Dear Esther. They made an Amnesia game, but Dear Esther is definitely like their most famous game, and it was like over a decade ago now. Which is like a very first person narrative focused game. Not a lot of gameplay, more just kind of walking around, taking in this story. And Still Wakes the Deep seems like it's sort of like that, but a little more involved in the gameplay side of things. More of a scary horror game. Dear Esther has some freaky moments in it for sure, but this is definitely more on the horror side of things. It's funny that I took so long to play to this game, but it actually ended up being perfect because this game is like set at Christmas, which I didn't realize. So it's like immediately as you're waking up, you're like reading a letter from your kid who's wishing you a Merry Christmas because you're out on this oil rig, and then you're walking around. There's Christmas trees and Christmas lights everywhere. And I'm like, man, I feel like I did not hear anyone talk about this, or it's not in like the trailers, which makes sense because they released it in the summer. But I'm glad I waited because it's like a perfect setting for it. And yeah, so the setup of the game is you are a guy working on this oil rig. I don't know if it's like near Scotland or something, but like it's a very Scottish game. Like all the people have like the thick Scottish accent, and it's really funny too because there's so many like little phrases or like insults in Scottish, and the subtitles. This is like the funniest thing. They'll say some like funny Scottish insult, and like me, I don't really know what it means, but I can understand it's an insult, but they like translate the insult into like something you can understand. So I don't know, they change it to like they're localizing it even though it's like spoken in English still, which is like hilarious. But yeah, it has a pretty jovial start, but then it like gets pretty quickly into the depths of it, which is that on this oil rig, some monster has attacked, and I'm not too far in it. And I think it's a pretty short game, so I couldn't even spoil too much if I wanted to. But I think the thing that it's clawing out to me as is like, man, this is very much like Alien Isolation, which I played for the first time earlier this year. So if people are fans of Alien Isolation, definitely check this game out. And I feel like I've heard it's pretty short, like 3 to 4 hours long, and that's what seems to be most people's complaint, including mine with Isolation, is that it's just way too long for a game that's kind of based off a movie, or the movies in general. So really enjoying this game. And also, I kind of didn't realize it until I was playing this, but like an oil rig, it kind of is feels like a space station a little bit. Like it's very metal, very metallic, a lot of like walkways. It's there's not a lot of just like cozy space. Like it's really all just like manufactured for like a certain job, right? So it's kind of fitting in that way too. And yeah, it's all right so far. The thing that I brushed up a little bit against is eventually there's some creature, like kind of the first major creature encounter. It's the classic: you're crouching, you're hiding under a table, you're hiding in a closet, you're like throwing wrenches at walls to make sounds for them to get distracted and go over check out. And I, no joke, died like 15 times on this first encounter. Like I had to redo it so many times. And I play so many of these games, even like Indiana Jones, like the last couple weeks, where you're crouching around throwing things to make distractions. I feel like that's my genre. You know, I play so many of those games, but this one's really really difficult. So I don't know how far I'll get in it just because of how hard it is. Maybe I'll drop the difficulty down. But yeah, really interesting, cool game. And yeah, definitely like a lot more involved than what I kind of expected for it. Just from the trailers, it looked very atmospheric, slow. And having played Dear Esther, which, as I mentioned, a game with very little actual gameplay and more just like walking around, yeah, very different style. So this is definitely a recommendation for me so far. It's on Game Pass, so it's pretty easily accessible for people there. And yeah, cool game. My one my one big complaint with it, I don't know if you experience this, Ray, when you're playing games, but I feel like my biggest pet peeve right now in video games is yellow paint. I'm gonna call it yellow paint itis, where like in games that like they're just trying to guide you, through the level. And so like the things that you can interact with, the ledges you can climb, the things you can shimmy on, are all just like painted yellow. I feel like this started back with like Uncharted. Uncharted had like yellow paint everywhere, and then every developer's like, "Ooh, that's a good way to like make sure our player doesn't get lost. Let's put yellow paint all over this stuff." But to me, I'm just at a point now where it just takes me out of these things, and I feel like I'm not even engaging with the game. Like you might as well put me in just like a blank room, and I'm just interacting with yellow paint. And then, like this game is beautiful. The lighting's fantastic. There's like rain effects on the window that look amazing for like an indie-ish game. But then like it's just so ugly because there's like yellow paint everywhere. And the weirdest thing of all is that in the settings, there's like a yellow paint setting, reduced or on. And so when I saw that in settings right at the beginning, I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. Let's turn this on reduced. I hate this kind of thing. But then there's still everything is covered in yellow paint. So I'm like, how can you have less yellow paint than what I currently have on here? So I know this is very nitpicky, but it's a thing specifically for me that just grinds my gears. And it's funny, the same thing happened with Star Wars Outlaws, which I played earlier this year, which is a game I really enjoyed, but same thing, yellow paint everywhere. And that game also had like a setting that you could turn off yellow paint, and there was still yellow paint everywhere. So I don't know what these games are just like almost lying to me. They're like, "Oh, we know you like this setting, Dylan. We're gonna put this in here for you." But then like either it's bugged or just like the amount of yellow paint that they're talking about is different than what I want as a player. So that is admittedly a kind of nitpicky thing. But yeah, otherwise still makes the Deep a really cool, interesting game so far. And I definitely, hopefully it's not this hard the whole way through. But yeah, I definitely want to keep going through it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, what you mentioned about how like on-screen prompts, for example, for like 3D JRPGs that I tend to play a lot, like Monster Hunter Stories, for example. Sometimes like I'm someone who likes to kind of navigate, not so much looking at my character, but looking at my map on like the
Right.
bottom
Yeah.
right hand side. So I'll see an icon that like, okay, that's me, and then our landmark or wherever we're headed is like a star on the map, and then side quests are different like colored dots, for example. And then there's usually like a light projecting from my dot on the map saying like, okay, you're going this way, and that's how I know that that's me moving on the map. So I'll like basically follow that and not really pay attention to my on-screen character, because also the map will show me, okay, there's a cluster of enemies nearby, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
let me just like navigate over there. So um that's like not, it's a little different than what you're talking about, because I don't get those on-screen prompts with like those huge glaring, like color, like indicators like you're
Yeah.
mentioning with the yellow paint, but I am someone who heavily relies on the map, that you could also toggle on and off if that's not like something that you really want in your experience and you just want to explore. But for me, I tend to lean on like on-screen prompts and things like that to be able to enjoy the game. So I think if it were me and I saw like a bunch of like different like colorful on-screen prompts that were just very like, dissociate it to like what the actual environment is. I can definitely agree with you there that it would be kind of jarring. I'd be like, you could have integrated this a little bit better.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like a mixed bag. I'm like, I could go with like the map, but then for me, I would probably like start leaning more towards like paying attention more to the map than I am in the game. But then if I get like the on-screen like yellow paint, then I'll be like, okay, yeah, this is like pulling me out of my immersement. So I'm just like, what do I do? Which one is better? I don't know. I would like try and play if I had it side by side. I would compare it, but I kind of get what you're saying too. It's just like both things would probably pull me out of the game one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure half the things of yellow paint that I'm complaining about in this game was like someone play tested it for the developers and like could not find the ladder right in front of them, and so like, okay, let's paint it yellow, and then that way the next player like doesn't miss it. But then it seems like, okay, well, players must have been getting lost all over the place because there's paint everywhere. And it's funny, it's like such a linear game where there's like not you can't really go in different rooms. Like you it's very very linear, at least so far. So it just feels like a little over the top. But yeah, I can definitely sympathize with that, the mini map thing too, where I feel like certain games when they have just like the compass at the top that's like loaded with icons or the map. And I feel like, am I even looking at the game anymore, or am I just looking at the map? Like, I feel like I'm playing like a simulation of the game or something. Which, yeah, it's like useful if you're trying to hunt down specific things. But I feel like if you want to get like immersed in a world, which typically like a first-person game like this is trying to make it very immersive, yeah, I feel like it just has the opposite effect. Unfortunately, that's just one of those like industry trends that I feel like has really I've really noticed it bubbled up in the last few years. Especially like, yeah, I remember noticing a lot with like Resident Evil 4, which is such a beautiful game, like that remake. But then like, yeah, just yellow paint itis everywhere. And so I'm like, oh, this game's so beautiful. I wish I wasn't getting distracted by like the color that's normally associated with like a warning sign, like it's like a road sign or something like that. So once again, maybe nitpicky, but yeah, there's my thoughts on Still Wakes the Deep. How about with that we take our first ad break. We will be right back. Okay, we are back. Ray, any other games specifically you've been talking that you've been playing recently, or do you want to move on to next topic?
um, yeah, we can move on to the next topic. I've been spending a lot of time on the titles I mentioned earlier.
Nice. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about just some of your other like the specific genres that you mentioned to me that really caught my eye. So like JRPGs is one that you mentioned. Which, yeah, I guess Pokemon, like, I don't, do you consider Pokemon a JRPG? I guess it kind of is. People don't really think about it in that same realm as like Final Fantasy and whatnot, but I guess on paper it kind of is. But I know another one that you're interested in to some extent is Dragon Quest. I want to hear about that because that's a series that I've very barely like dipped my toes into it, and I want to just know more about it because it kind of seems like my cup of tea in terms of being a little more silly, but still having like the depth of a normal JRPG. So yeah, what is it about Dragon Quest that you're interested in?
Yeah, I think you described it pretty well. So it is definitely a high fantasy themed IP where each entry, at least outside of 1 through 3, is essentially like a new protagonist, new group of characters, new adventure or antagonist, yada yada. But a lot of the um, uh, creature types that you encounter out in the wild, they've more or less stayed the same over the last 40 years. Like Dragon Quest is a pretty old IP,
Yeah, for sure.
and it's heavily inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. So like a lot of the themes of like turn-based combat and different classes, or that you can have your character either as like a warrior or a mage, or like a wizard, a healer, things like that. Uh, yeah, there's just so many different classes that you could align your or create your character around, or create your team around. So yeah, if you want to be able to like focus your team heavily on like all offense, like with like all warrior types, for example. You could do that, or just like kind of max out your team's like attack and attack stats individually for everyone on your team, and just like go full offense. Or if you want to be more focused on defense and like healing, and more of like the endurance side of building up your team, you could do that as well. Or just have it be more balanced, where some folks are defense, some are healers, some are more offense. And then you could like basically design your team around like, okay, we'll have the defense in front, the offense in the middle, and then the healers in the back, something like that.
Mm.
So things like that type of like deeper surface, like strategy around like really making the game your own, and curating it around your own experience. That's like the core of like what I love about RPGs, or I guess specifically JRPGs in general, because they basically like introduced me to those concepts of like being able to, think think strategically around how you want to play the game, as opposed to just having one protagonist and one move set, and then going from point A to point B, and then B to
Right.
C, and then finishing the game through a really linear path. With Dragon Quest, similar to Final Fantasy, it it has like this really like endearing art style. Obviously, like the creator of the artist for Dragon Ball
Hmm.
and Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest, yeah, for like the last like 30 plus years. Yeah, there's that signature character design that is like very enduring about it. And I think what differentiates it from Final Fantasy is that Dragon Quest has been, I think, a little bit more, a little less experimental, I guess, like in terms of how it approaches turn-based combat. Is pretty, pretty formulaic, I would say. Like, it's very much like, if you're a fan of Dragon Quest, then each additional entry in the series is not going to be too much of a learning curve, as far as like you being able to navigate the combat, or uh expect any like random encounters with creatures that you're not familiar with, because like I said, there's a lot of like reoccurring monster encounters that are just like legacy uh monsters throughout the series. So
Nice.
I would say that it's probably like the most consistent in terms of like gameplay. Definitely, like I said, character design and gameplay design. And I think that's more or less why it's sort of gone under the radar, as far as like folks being so much more aware of like Final Fantasy as an IP, as it became more popular in the West in the 90s. Whereas with Dragon Quest, it was always just sort of like, on simmer, the entire time. It
Right.
was just consistently, um, on the back burner a little bit, but it had its like hardcore dedicated fans internationally, especially like in Japan, that kept, the series alive. And we're selling like all the units and stuff, and like some of the
Yeah, I
games
guess
get
it took a while
localized.
before it came to North America too and got like the English translations. I don't know which number it was that I don't know. I think they've gone back and re-released a lot of them, right? But for a
Yeah,
while there, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't even really available in English.
yeah, that, yeah, exactly. So my familiarity with the series finally came around when Dragon Quest 11 came out. And for a lot
Right.
of folks, that is like the most recent entry for like as an introduction to the series too. And beautiful game, I love it. Like all the characters in it are just like so endearing. I love like I said, all the different classes that you're able to create your team around. Like I said, more like warrior types, or like magic users, etc. You're able to kind of curate your team around that. And the stories themselves are just so endearing too. Like, to your point, they're just like very um I would say that they are very like self-aware in terms of like, yeah, they are like kind of silly and like satirical and
Mm-hmm.
engaging, but they're also very endearing, because well, for me, for example, I get attached to all of my characters, because they all have like their own individual personalities and kind of backstories, and how they get introduced into your group through whatever way that they crossed paths with you, and they have like a significant, presence in how you advance your story, whether you choose to use them exclusively in your team or if you decide to swap them out or not. And the intercharacter banter as well is also something that I'm a big fan of too,
Mm.
especially in like games where your your decisions are impacted by who is present in your team, and then the
Okay.
information and side quests and stuff that you get in game are dependent on who's in your team as well. So things like that, where like there are little instances where you can control the trajectory of your story in a way that increases the replayability and that makes it more memorable, because it's something that these are decisions that I'm making to design
Mm.
the my gameplay experience around what I want to see. But it is like a story that's already sort of self-contained, but I'm going about it in a way that that I feel is more reliant on my individual preferences, as opposed to just the game designers giving me a a one track path to follow.
Right. Yeah, I've been playing. I believe it's 8 that I've been playing, the one of the 3DS ones. Uh, pretty slowly, and it's been a few months since I picked it up. But like even just talking to you now, I kind of want to go back and pick it up because yeah, I mean one of my favorite parts about it was like just the insane enemy designs. Like I remember one of them was just like two peppers on like a skewer together and like they
Yeah.
had faces of course, and they were like the one that has like a boot and it's just like a big eye in the boot,
Yeah.
or like the dancing devil who like is trying to
Yes.
seduce you. Like it's so stupid but so fun. And like yeah, the mechanics around the combat, like I feel like especially since I jumped into 8 as like my first one, a lot of quality of life stuff in there. Like I remember there's tons of settings in terms of like setting characters who will just like auto attack or like take certain actions, or like oh when you're low health it'll automatically like this character will automatically heal, and then you could just like oh yeah I want one of my guys to like auto, and then one of them I want to control, or you can make all of them auto, or change that on and off on the fly. And like that is amazing. That's the kind of stuff I feel like I want from a JRPG. And if I go back to like some of the older ones where it feels very, I don't know, I guess like the framework for it is a lot more structured and you can't really, I don't know, that almost feels like you're cheating the game a little bit, but it's like, okay, we know you've played 8 of these games or 7 of these games in the series. Let's like move away from some of the inconveniences, and that kind of thing allows like makes grinding great because you can just like put it on auto attack and just like watch something on Netflix and then just like walk around, interact with these weird peppers and just like level up your characters in the background, which, is kind of part of the journey of, I feel like Dragon Quest, I feel like as a JRPG series known to maybe be a bit more grindy, or at least like the games are typically quite long. So maybe yeah, maybe you gotta have those bouts where you're just going around training up before you hit the next story beat or something like that. But yeah, I definitely want to get into 11 more at some point. I think I played the demo for it, which was like pretty long on Switch as far as demos go. And yeah, I just love the art style so much. I love the colors. Yeah, the Toriyama art, like just the eyeballs, like all the characters have so much personality to them. Especially, I'm a huge fan of Smash Bros. And ever since they added Hero in there as a playable character, and like seeing the little details and all the different outfits and stuff, and that they have like the character from each of the different games, or at least 8 different ones, is really great. It's yeah, a very I like what you like, endearing, I think is a great word to describe it that you use there. Just like such a charming art style, and like I don't know, whimsy to it, I suppose. And I'm sure it gets dark and deep at some points, but at least the presentation, or like to get you in the door, charms you in, and then it maybe gets into the deeper, darker stuff later on.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely increased my interest to go back to those previous titles like you mentioned. 8 is up there as one like that I hope either gets re-released with
Right.
a lot of like additional quality of life improvements or enhancements, or I'll probably play the 3DS version of it, if not like maybe the PS2 version. I have to look online because I usually do go to Reddit and I'm like, which version of a
Yeah.
game is the best one to play?
Ask the pros. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and Reddit never fails me. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. Is the what's up with Dragon Quest on the Game Boy Advance? Like, what did it do on that generation, if anything?
I'm pretty sure there are none.
That's
Um,
crazy. That
yeah,
seems
because
wild.
yeah, I was actually looking for any Dragon Quest game on GBA, and I didn't find any specifically. I know I've looked like multiple times. I
Maybe
probably
there's like a
missed one.
spin-off or something, right? Because there's like what is there? There's Dragon Quest. I know Builders is one of the new ones, but then there's like
Yeah.
What is like? There's like a Pokemon-y sort of Dragon Quest game, right? Like more about collecting creatures,
Oh, Dragon Quest Treasures. I've played
treasures.
that
Okay,
one. Yeah, and Dragon Quest Monsters. Yes, that one.
monsters, right?
I did just pick that one up. I haven't played it yet. So
Okay,
yes,
cool.
I got I got familiar with Dragon Quest in addition to 11 through like a lot of their spin-offs like you said builders and then treasures and monsters. So I didn't realize that these were like series or like entries that or I guess like spin-offs of the main IP that existed prior to, you know, my introduction to the series
Yeah,
as well. And that's where I was like, okay, Dragon Quest 11, where are the rest of the games? And I looked online and I started to like realize how deep this
yeah,
IP goes back. So that yeah, like to your point, like in the West we just like had little to no exposure to this series.
yeah. I feel like 11 was. I mean, the Switch, just is such a huge console that for so like I feel like most Nintendo series, it's like, oh, this is the best-selling Metroid game. This is the best-selling Kirby game. That just happens to be the case for like almost every Nintendo series, right? Because it's just such a big console. And I feel like that was kind of the case for Dragon Quest 11 a little bit. It almost feels like a Fire Emblem Awakening moment for the series, which is weird to say because we haven't had like Dragon Quest 12 yet, so we don't really know where it's going to go from there. Obviously, they're dipping back into these remakes of 3, which released recently that we were talking about, and then I guess they're doing it in like the story order, right? So it's like 3, 1, 2, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really excited to see kind of where it goes from there. But yeah, what's the deal with treasures? Is that a Pokemon-y sort of situation, or what's? I don't think I've heard about that sub series actually.
Yeah, so Treasures is a little Pokemon-y in that you can capture or I guess tame different um different monsters out in the field, and there are different variations, colors, and abilities of all these different monsters that you go out and search for. And a lot of it is related to like side quests or getting unique, getting the abilities of these different monsters to in order to help you find unique treasures across like different maps. So, like there will be one monster type that will be able to like scale difficult like surfaces like mountains or like cliffs
Okay.
and then there's like a king slime or a queen slime that you're able to like bounce up on to reach like higher
Nice.
like platforms as well. So it is very like quirky, very enduring, and like yeah, there's just a lot of really that was like kind of like the biggest like introduction for me to a lot of the different monster types. So I'm just like, oh yeah, I've seen this character this monster in Dragon Quest 11. Oh, I've seen that in like this other Dragon Quest game. Oh, this is why the slime is like the mascot of Dragon Quest, because it's like literally everywhere. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Is treasure, is that on the Switch? The one that you played there, Treasures?
Yes.
Okay,
Hmm.
cool. I'm gonna have to throw that on my wish list because that sounds perfect. Yeah, I mean, so many of these Dragon Quest games. Is Treasures like as? Because I think 11, like what I've heard, it's like, oh yeah, 100 hours to beat the game. Insane, kind of overwhelming. Is Treasures? I don't know if you've beaten it yet, but like, is it kind of? I don't know if overwhelming is the right word, but it feels a little overwhelming for me as someone who doesn't play on JRPGs, just in terms of the time commitment. How does Treasures feel like pretty easy to kind of just get into, and maybe you don't necessarily need to beat it, but even just mess around with the mechanics for a few hours is a good time.
Yeah, it's definitely a game that you could pick up and play, and it's not where like your progression in the story is contingent on you fulfilling every side quest. They're
Right.
there if you want to do them, but the mainline quests, in order to complete the game, are very short and simple, straight to the
Nice.
point. So yeah, it's something that is very like easy to get into, and if you want more out of it, it's there for you.
That is going on my list. That's a great recommendation. Any other JRPGs? What are any other favorite series of yours? What are your kind of top dogs?
Hmm. I did mention the uh tactical RPG genre
Yeah.
or subgenre, I guess, as being one that I love a lot. So Final Fantasy Tactics definitely up
Nice.
there. Just like I think the most recent new IP that I played that was a tactical strategy RPG was Triangle Strategy. So that is
Nice.
from the
Yes.
creators of or the same team who did Octopath Traveler, which is another, oh my gosh, another amazing like JRPG series 1 and 2. Oh man, those games are just like incredible. And they also Octopath and Triangle Strategy team also did the Dragon Quest III HD remaster, so another reason to go pick that up.
Yeah, that
But
engine
yeah,
is just insanely beautiful. I love those games. Yeah, Triangle Strategy, that was my game of the year of whatever, 21, 2022. I forget when it came out exactly, but I love that game so much. And Octopath Traveler, I think I put like a good 40, 50 hours into it. Still haven't got to the sequel, unfortunately. But yeah, it makes me very happy to hear. I love Triangle Strategy. That game is unreal, especially like, as I said, I've played so many of like that's a big genre for me too. And yeah, it was still just super unique and had a ton of cool mechanics. And that's also how I felt like going back to Final Fantasy Tactics, kind of after playing a bunch of Fire Emblem and Triangle Strategy and stuff. And like the rules system is kind of weird, and like the non-linearity of exploring the maps and like doing like taking on certain jobs, but you're not just going through it and like here's level 1, 2, 3, 4, which like every other game in the genre kind of has. Like I find the structure of that game really enticing. But yeah, I love how like we're really spoiled for choice when it comes to that genre. There's so many different flavors, and yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're into all those games as well. That's cool.
yeah, definitely. I was encouraged to also pick up uh, Tactics Ogre. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah,
So
I
I do
think so.
have that
Yeah.
on Switch. I haven't started it yet, but I did that because I think I read that Final Fantasy Tactics was originally going to be part of the Tactics Ogre series back in the day. So like there were like
Oh, interesting.
yeah, like so Tactics Ogre is like on Switch is a remaster, I guess a HD remaster of the earlier version of it that came out I think on like PS1,
Yeah, that sounds
something like
right.
that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Final Fantasy Tactics was also on the PS1. So yeah, all that to say that like yeah, I was like on a big like tactical RPG spike when I was picking up that and playing um Triangle Strategy. I think I put in close to like 70 or 80 hours.
Nice.
I'm
Yeah.
someone who likes to go back to maps and like grind new characters so I can like level them up and stuff, and it's like really fulfilling just to be able to go back and like get new items and like be able to build up currency and buy new weapons and like armor and stuff. I'm someone who does that because I'm like I need to have the best of everything. So
Yeah.
I need to have as much currency as possible, blah blah blah. So like I end up never playing the actual story because I'm like constantly
Yeah.
going everywhere else.
Yeah, that's relatable. And I feel like with Triangle Strategy too, that was one that so many games have dialogue choices that lead to different branching paths, and often I'm like, it's really cool that exists, but I don't often replay the games. I'm like, I'm glad. I feel like it's meaningful the route I took because I had to make those choices, but I don't necessarily need to see every possibility. I don't need to go through all the multiverses like Doctor Strange. But Triangle Strategy was one like the day after I beat it, which was yeah, like 70 hours or something. I'm like immediately boot up a new save. I wanted to like take some branching paths and just see like the different ways that this can go. And yeah, like I found that the decisions around that so engaging. Where like anytime there was one of those big branching paths that you would have to like have the council, like you'd talk to all your people in the town, you'd get their perspective on it, you could try and sway them if you want, but then like ultimately it comes down to like a vote, so you don't even have like the full say of what's going to happen. And like there was one or two occasions when I was wanting to go to one place and my team just voted the other way for whatever reason. So maybe I could have convinced them better, but like I didn't reload a save and try and redo that. I was like, this is great. I love that there's like consequences to my choices here. And then on top of that, yeah, just the tactics gameplay of it was so interesting, and so many weird classes like that one. I think it was the blacksmith class that just like builds ladders and traps, and like
Oh, I
that's just
remember
so
them.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That
just
was
love
really
having
fun.
weird, goofy stuff like that on top of like your basic archers and warriors and all that. So I just love Triangle Strategy. I don't think it sold super duper well. I don't even know if Octopath Traveler did, but we got a sequel for that game, so I really hope we do get another. I also feel like Triangle Strategy, not a great game title, so I don't know if that helped sell the game or not. But like, I hope we get another one of that. I want to see where they would go in a sequel. Not even like following those characters, but just a new take on kind of the ideas that they did there. It was such a cool game.
Yeah, definitely because I think this that studio they tend to lean more towards the um uh turn-based combat, but more in the style of like Final Fantasy, where your team is on the opposite side of the enemy, and then everyone is just sort of like taking turns attacking each other. Whereas with like Triangle Strategy, yeah, it's a you're navigating across a grid. So I would like to see them make more original games like that for sure.
Yeah, and yeah, Tactics Ogre, as you mentioned, that's another one that's been on my Switch wish list since it came out, and just kind of waiting for the right sale on it. I think one of the enticing things for me on that is just like the vast amount of, I don't know if it's classes or just like characters, but I remember like looking through a list at just like all the freakish characters. Like you're not just having humans, you're having like all sorts of weird beasts and demons on your team, and it just feels like so I one thing I like love about a Fire Emblem game is just like picking the roster for the individual mission and like looking at the map and seeing like, oh, there's a lot of elevation here, a lot of rivers. Maybe I want more movement, the flying units, like making those decisions. Even though if like most of the time you're gonna use like 80% the same people, but it feels like with Tactics Ogre, you get so many characters and they have so many crazy classes that it seems like really fun mission to mission to kind of pick who are the best like specialists for this particular job. And that seems like a, and it seems like it's kind of more in the realm of like Final Fantasy Tactics otherwise from what I've seen. I don't know if it was like the same team that made those games. I wouldn't be surprised. I think they're both Square Enix games, right? So yeah, I don't know. That's definitely another one that I, yeah, looking forward to picking up at some point in the future. And then we've already gone so long on just these topics. I kind of figured this would happen. We had like a bunch of topics lined up, but like I don't think we need to get to all of them. But I want to ask you a couple more things. One is like you mentioned that you're a fan of indie games, and that can mean so many things, especially in 2024, where there's just hundreds of indie games that come out every year. But I don't know. What are your some of your favorites there? Whether that's just like genre or like specific games or series or developers. I'm curious.
You see, so these days I tend to discover a lot of different indie games on X, and then a lot of them do crowdfunding campaigns on
Okay.
Kickstarter to fund the development or the extended like demos of those games. So a lot of them are basically like inspired by by a lot of my favorite games, like oh,
Nice.
inspired by Chrono Trigger, inspired by Final Fantasy VI, yada yada. So like all these like milestone like games pretty much fuel like not only the graphic presentation but the gameplay and definitely the music as well. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them take those cues and then like we were mentioning put in the quality of life improvements too. So I guess like my biggest example of an indie game that like just blew up that like everyone was like on top of like when it dropped was Sea of Stars.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sea of Stars, like basically like if you like Chrono Trigger, you'll like Sea of Stars, I think. I would hope. So yeah, that was one that like so many people, were totally like, like fans of. I didn't hear very many like, negative like much negative feedback around it because there was just so much care put into how the three-person, I guess, team aspect and how you're able to um quickly like navigate between all your different team members to assign different like attacks to all of your enemies on screen and then allow them to kind of like integrate with the other character. Like there's basically like co-op, like not co-op but like let's say one character doesn't move and then they also need like an additional character to like have a move set planned for like an even greater attack. So things like that like were very strategic as well, even though it like wasn't like a tactical game. So yeah, also just like map design, character design,
Mm-hmm.
music, just like everything is just so lush and dimensional and like full of life. Everything on screen was like moving, or had some sense of like um uh like just like vitality around it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Definitely.
I really enjoyed my time with it. I still love that game. I need to go back and finish it, but yeah, it
Yes.
was just like an incredible experience, like an endeavor for an indie game for sure.
You are speaking my language. Like another, that was my game of the year last year. I got the physical Switch version, and this is
Me
like
too.
the box art. Yeah,
Nice.
limited edition. I love that game so much, and yeah, you definitely need to get to the end of it because like the amount of story twists or like character surprises in that game just shocked me because I feel like the first, a lot of people were like bounced off the game pretty early because like there's that longer like school sequence at the beginning, and I get it, but like there are so many just crazy paths that game takes. I'm looking forward to. I don't know if it's come out yet, but they announced like co-op DLC actually, like adding like multiplayer co-op to it. I don't know if that's two player or if you would get like a 3-player. Like I assume it would be 2-player. And one character plays as, I forget the names of the main characters, but the two protagonists. But maybe it'd be 3-player because, as you mentioned, the combat is kind of built around that 3-player system. So that's really cool. And then like that DLC is supposed to come out next year for it too, right? Did you see that announcement for the DLC for that?
Yeah, it's gonna be free as well for folks
Oh,
who have the
right
game.
on.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that game sold incredibly well, so that's very generous of them to be like, yeah, we've made enough money. I'm sure they'll sell a bunch more when they put the DLC out and people pick it up or pick it up on a new platform or something. But yeah, Sea of Stars, just what an outstanding game, and as you mentioned, like the visuals and the music is outstanding, and that combat system, and that to me that was like that was a game where I did everything in. Like every town I would stop at the wheels table at the tavern and like play wheels and like get all the unlocks there. Did like every side quest, had to get all the collectibles just because I wanted to see every last thing, which I don't normally do. It's rare for me to do every last thing. But yeah, I could not put that game down, and I was sad when it was over. I'm like, oh, my Sea of Stars time is like done now. I have to just sit and wait for, I guess, this DLC, which seems like I don't have to wait too long for that, but very exciting. I'll have to hit you up when that comes out, and we can maybe do another episode talking about the DLC when that comes out. That would be
Yes,
fun.
definitely. And then I'll have to like actually get through more of the game so I can enjoy
Yes.
the DLC more. So yes.
Yeah. That's great. Any other I don't know, favorite indie games?
Let me see.
Putting you on the
Uh,
spot.
um, hmm. Um, what else comes to mind? So there are a lot of platformer games that I actually really like that
Mm-hmm.
are inspired by like let's say like uh Super Mario 64 or Galaxy or gosh, I'm blanking, Sunshine. So like a lot of
Right.
those like mainline Mario games, like, so what I'm thinking of is Super Lucky's Tale. I think that was
Ooh.
like, this was kind of like a mascot driven platformer game. So you're playing like this little anthropomorphic fox, and a lot of the platforming is reminiscent of what is it? Uh the most recent, oh, Super Mario Odyssey. So yeah,
Mm.
like this game that I'm referring to, Super Lucky's Tale. Yeah, a lot of the I guess like um platforming features and exploration, somewhat open world but still linear level design is really fun, very like captivating and engaging. Animation just, very like, very um like not over the top, but like it's so like, endearing, and yes, just like very smooth gameplay. I think a lot of after Odyssey came out, that definitely like, like inspired a lot of like different 3D platformers after it to make it more into like an open worldy sort of a exploration map driven sort of experience, while still having like a linear A to B, intention, but also fleshing it out with like more places to explore. So yeah, Super Lucky's Tale would probably be another one I would recommend.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like I feel like platformers never really went away, but it does feel like there has been a renaissance in terms of the indie space for like the 3D. Like I guess maybe it feels like the technology is at a point now where it's easier for like smaller teams to make games like that. And so yeah, there's been so many cool just mascot platformers. Like I remember Snake Pass. Did you ever play that one? It's like a
No,
weird
I've heard
one.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a little different because it's very clunky, intentionally so. But that game's really fun. Yeah, there's a lot of other cool ones, and like yeah, more hardcore ones. Like I really enjoyed Pseudo Regalia from last year. Um, Super Lucky's Tales. Yeah, that one's been on my list, and like I don't know. Yeah, just seeing like so many of these different ones, I feel like there's like multiple every year, which is really cool. It's just a very thriving space. Obviously, a lot of people are like very nostalgic for Super Mario 64 and like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, like that era of platformers. And yeah, it now feels like those people who are like playing that as a kid are like now making games, and so that like those are the kind of games that they just want to make. And yeah, so we're just once again spoiled for choice on great indie platformer games. It's really cool to see. Yeah, and then I maybe we'll just close it out with one more potentially smaller topic here, but another thing that I know you're into is just retro games, handhelds, and things like that in general. I got a question for you. As like a emulator, you know your stuff. I'm very like in the dark when it comes to knowing all that stuff. Do you know like what's the deal with like PSP? If I want to emulate a PSP game, what's like the best place to go? What's the best thing to do?
Yes. So, great question. I actually have a few different handheld, like standalone emulator devices in addition to my phone. So, yeah, I actually reviewed one of them on my gaming channel. So,
Ooh,
this one, yeah, so it's very cool. It has like that translucent purple shell that I'm like really big into from the Game Boy Color days. And this one, it's kind of like a just like a bigger screen version of this one. But
that one straight up looks like a Sony console. Is that's not an
yeah,
actual
it looks like a
PSP?
PS.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it looks like a PS Vita, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of got the best of both worlds here. But what I'm saying is that, like, to answer your question, for PSP games, I tend to look for something that can replicate that experience of playing it on that similar screen format. So this would
Right.
probably be the one that I would recommend. At least playing it on a similar size screen, because going back down to, like, a smaller screen, even if it's like on your iPhone, which you can now emulate. There is an emulator for PSP games for free on your iPhone, but
Right.
there's no, like, there's not that tactical satisfaction of being able to, like, have this, like, elevated
Yeah.
joystick, and the buttons and things like that. So I will say that if you are able to get that experience through like maybe like a lower cost emulator device, like from AliExpress or Temu, whatever, I would say go for it. And yeah, I would say that playing PSP games like on a PC, or like I mentioned, your phone, or any other device that doesn't that can't give you that same, like I said, that visceral response to
Yeah, I think that's
being.
pretty important to me rather than like touch control stuff. I feel like even back in the
Yes.
day, back in high school when everyone had like emulators for all sorts of games on their phones, I was like, I'd rather just like play my Game Boy Advance still because I like having the buttons. So that's definitely relatable. Yeah.
Yeah, that's essentially what I was getting at, is that you can emulate PSP games on basically anything now.
Yeah.
But I would encourage you to potentially look for like one of those, like, standalone handheld emulator devices, and that will give you that a more satisfying experience, as opposed to just being able to emulate it on something more convenient.
Right. So what are those two called? Those two ones that you just held up there?
Oh yeah, so yeah, so these are designed by a manufacturer called Anbernic.
Right.
And
Okay.
yeah, and Anberic. And yeah, these are pretty much like some of their more popular devices, and I got into them because of YouTube reviews, and
Nice.
also because I wanted that, like, tactical sensation of feeling buttons and my joystick and different things like that, and being able to assign menus to buttons, and that satisfaction, just, it's something to, like, you can't like replicate it, I guess, like on phone, I guess. So there are some games that I would go out of my way to play on that, is even if, like, I have to, like, you know set it up to play a game, but, like, I know that
Hmm.
I will have a better experience than just playing it on my phone,
Yeah.
where I'm just sort of like doing on-screen prompts, but it's not as, like, engaging, I guess.
Right. Can you stick games into those ones, or are they only like you got to kind of download stuff from your computer, throw it on there with the emulator?
Yeah, there are yeah, basically SD card. Yeah, you have to, like, throw the
Gotcha.
emulators and the games on there.
It's very very random, but a few years ago learned about that there was like a Lord of the Rings tactics game on the PSP.
Yeah,
And have you played that game?
I haven't, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's not great, and like reviews for it are like a classic 6 out of 10. But I feel like I it looks like a Fire Emblem e sort of thing, and even if it's like not as in depth as that, it just looks like it's kind of recreating the story from like the movie. It has like the similar aesthetic as the movies. I'm just so nostalgic for those movies, and that's a genre I'm into that I really it's like I don't want to spend all this money on a PSP to play that game. Like it seems like a bit like financially not a great idea. But yeah, I think getting an emulator like that would be a good idea for me. And I'm sure that like because I never owned a PSP or Vita back in the day. So that's like a huge blind spot for me. Even like PlayStation in general. Played games at my friend's house growing up, but like yeah, until the PS4 didn't actually own any PlayStation console. So a lot of big blind spot for me there in terms of not knowing some of those games. But that's good. Can you play other on those ones that you had? Like, can you? I'm assuming you can download like other, not just PSP games, but like anything else too.
Yeah, so it basically is good up to Sega Dreamcast, I would say. So
Oh,
like,
okay.
yeah, Sega Saturn, like I don't know if like there's a lot of like Sega Saturn players out there, but it's kind of choppy on this. So like I would say
Mm,
like unless you really know like about it, then like you probably wouldn't play it on here anyway. But anyway, so yeah, to answer your question, yeah, perfect for like playing like PS1 games, for example. Like
nice.
it's got the dual joysticks and PSP, yeah, totally fine. Like even though PSP doesn't have like two it was the games weren't built around like two joysticks, like just the one is fine. And
Right.
then
Okay.
let me see. Yeah, it actually plays Dreamcast games really, really well. So yeah. Another thing too I wanted to kind of like give my 2 cents on is that like I have tried using my phone with like one of those like controller shells
Oh
that
yes.
like
Yeah.
have like uh like I think uh for some folks I think the most popular brand is called Backbone. They're
Right.
just based like any like generic, controller case really that is basically a Bluetooth controller to play those games on your phone. And for me, I don't know, it's something about like having a dedicated device for something. It motivates me a little bit more to put more serious effort into a game and dedicate more time to it, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to like a device like my phone where that I have multiple uses for. And it's also like I constantly get like notifications or tempted to check other apps like when I'm playing on my
Yeah.
phone for some reason. So that's another thing as well that like I know folks like want to have one device for like one purpose. Or like they want to have one device that can do everything, but I there is something to be said about having a dedicated device for things like specific game experiences that you can only get on like the native hardware.
Yeah. I that's very relatable. Like for me in particular as well, where I like to differentiate those spaces and like yeah on my phone like play Marvel Snap. I haven't played super recently, but like that was kind of the one exception I had. But like otherwise, like even like PC games because I work at the computer, I'm podcasting here at the computer. I'm spending so much time in front of my screen here that I try and like I really only play Steam games if like that's my the only place a game is like UFO 50 for example. But otherwise, like that's where I've for the last few years I've really preferred just playing on a console, playing on a handheld, really just have those dedicated spaces. So that's definitely very relatable for me. Uh, you mentioned so for Game Boy Advance, like Pokemon, you've been playing like a one on your phone right now. But do you have a favorite like Game Boy Advance? I guess those, as you mentioned, those two devices there could do it, even if the resolution's a little different. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have a favorite device that you own for emulating Game Boy Advance era stuff?
Yeah. So I use my phone out of convenience, like I
Yes, that makes
mentioned, but
sense.
to
Yeah.
get the most fulfilling experience. So this is gonna be weird, and I hope I can like map my way through an explanation for this. So between the two, some folks would be like, "Oh yeah, play it on the bigger screen," like, and I'm just like, "Well, no, like I would probably play it on the smaller one, just because these games were, kind of intentionally
Yeah,
designed
for
around like
sure. Yeah.
a specific, presentation and like um when the pixels start to get like blown out a little bit, even if it's the
Mm.
same like 3 by 4 presentation on both devices, for some reason like it's a little more um jarring to see larger pixels as opposed to just like the smaller like more detailed, okay, yeah, these are shadows, they're made to like look this way, as opposed to like being blown up on a larger screen just for the sake of like being
Yeah.
able to do it, especially
Yeah.
like on Switch. like when I try to play like GBA games on Switch, I think that's also something that's like kind of jarring because I'm not used to seeing these pixelated games like blown up like
Yeah, especially
on
if
a
you're
bigger
playing it
screen.
like on your TV. Yeah, it's like, what the heck? This looks kind of weird. Like, it almost like takes
Yeah.
away from what made, like, so those things were meant to be so small that it's almost like your brain is filling in the gaps of like you're looking at something and kind of just assuming what it is. But then when it's so big and you're like, wait, that doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it just reminds me of back in the day playing Pokemon like Red or Blue through like the cartridge reader for on Pokemon Stadium. So you were able to put a cartridge reader on your N64 controller, then put your Pokemon game in, and you were able to play Pokemon Red on your TV. And I was playing. I was like, I need for the ability to do so. That's great. The novelty is like fine, but in terms of like my preferred way of playing that game, it was not that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely relatable. Uh, awesome. I think that's a like we did have a couple other topics on our plate, but I feel like that's a pretty good place to call it for the day. Ray, this was a super fun discussion. I feel like it didn't take long for us to find a lot of like crossovers of things, series or games or whatever weird things that we're both just super into. So this was a really good time. Once again, do you want to just shout out where people can follow you after this episode?
Yeah, you can definitely check me out on X/Twitter at Glimmering Harpy, and that's pretty much where like all of my content is promoted, and then my links to my various social media channels, various platforms, I should say, and other content like for looking at my past like TikTok content or YouTube Reels, or YouTube Shorts, and yeah, my two channels for movie talk and like gaming talk. Yeah, all of that is centered there, easy to access on X, and yeah, that's where you can find me.
Right on. Well, thank you, Raya, so much for joining me. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As I said at the very beginning, once again, next week's episode will be the Game of the Year episode with me and Kirkland, so that should be a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye bye.